What's going on, YouTube? I'm gonna make a quick video about Docker Compose. So before you do Docker Compose, you're gonna want to know what Docker is. It's basically on my MacBook, I run a program called Docker, and it virtualizes a Linux kernel. And on top of that Linux kernel, you can run several different containers. And they're all running off the same kernel, but they're separate containers that you can do, kind of whatever you want with. So Docker Compose is basically, it's a file that you will use to orchestrate, is the keyword, to orchestrate several of these containers and do something, hopefully do something cool with it. So you're going to want to install Docker and Docker Compose before you start this. So that's kind of reflected in my GitHub here. And there's links to it in the README. You're going to need those. So what are we going to do with Docker and Docker Compose? We're going to just do a quick little project where we have two websites. And all four of these are Docker containers. So we got one container that has a static web page. It's going to, hello world, whatever, something really simple. And then we have another one here that's a Flask web app, coded with Python. And it's not going to do that much either, but it's going to actually count how many visitors have been to the site, not unique visitors, but how many hits, and it's going to write them to this database, and then it's going to fetch the data back, like, oh, how many hits have there been, and just tell you on the screen. So nothing nothing crazy, but it's just an example. And then we've got an Nginx reverse proxy. So this will take all the traffic, and let's say this is running on your MacBook or your local computer, your whatever. So it's going to be localhost / web app, and then it'll go here. Or I think it's actually localhost / app, and the traffic will go here. Or if you type localhost / static, then the traffic will be sent here, and you'll get back, what's running in this container. So yeah, I mean, you could run this, on the cloud and give it a, a real like public IP address, and then you could access it that way too, but we're just going to do it on my MacBook today. So let's take a look at, here's my little project, and we'll look at my Docker Compose file. But basically, I mean, the long and short of it is, like, there's the Flask app stuff is in here, and the reverse proxy, there's like one configuration file you need is going to be in there, and the static content is in there. So let's look at the Docker Compose. We know that in this case, let's start from the top, like the Nginx proxy. This is just what's going to take in traffic coming from, I mean, probably just from you, but in theory from like wherever. So we're going to name this container reverse proxy, and that's a logical ID, and then we'll name it. And then image, what does this mean? This means like what image from Docker Hub, which is where all the different types of Docker containers are stored. Like, what image are we going to use? So this is just like an image that's set up with Nginx on it. So, and it's with Alpine Linux. So it's the simplest form of Linux you can have, the most lightweight, rather, form of Linux that you can run. And yeah, so it's Nginx, and I specify what kind of Nginx, image do I want? Oh, I want an Alpine one, so it's as small as possible, because we're literally doing next to nothing. We're doing one thing on it, so we don't need a bunch of frills. So yeah, then ports. This just means we're going to map port 80 on your host machine to port 80 on your Docker container. So whatever is exposed on port 80 of my Docker container, I'm going to be able to access that through port 80 of my local host, or of the IP where this is running, if you were running it not on your local machine. Volumes. This just means I'm going to take everything in my project folder, reverse proxy, because like this is where I am, my root folder of my project, and then go one level to reverse proxy. Everything that's in there, I'm going to put in here on my Docker container. So it's just in this folder, there's just a simple Nginx configuration file, and I'm just going to copy that where the Nginx configuration files go, which is etc/Nginx. And then depends on, I don't want this proxy server, I don't want this to be built or to go up until these other containers exist, until they're built and they're composed, because otherwise, where is this traffic being directed to? It needs to be directed to these places, or these need to exist first. So that's why I put depends on, just so it knows what order to build it in. Okay, so then we have like a static website here. This one's pretty straightforward. It just takes Nginx Alpine again. It's going to serve Nginx port 80 in the Docker container. That's going to be mapped to port 81 of my local machine, because I don't want it running. Port 80 is already taken, so yeah. Then what are we going to do? We're going to take static content, same thing we did here, except we're going to put that in the nginx.html folder, because that's where, you know, it serves HTML files. So this is our static website that we discussed earlier. Then the Flask container. We're going to need to build with this. So this is what this means is we have a Docker file in our project folder. So if we just type docker build dot, it would do the same thing as we're doing here with build dot. It's just going to basically build a Docker image that runs our little Flask app on it. So, and exposes port 5000. So this Docker image right off the bat is going to be running our Flask app. And then here's the Redis database. It's again Redis Alpine, so it means, you know, we're already going to have this installed, and it's going to be on the lightest distribution of Linux we can get. And we're going to expose port 6379, which is, you know, the port Redis uses. Okay, so let me show you the Docker file now. So basically when we did build dot, it was like, all right, I'm looking for a Docker file so I can build in this folder. And it found this Docker file. So it takes a Python image. Again, we're basing it off Alpine to keep everything as light as possible. And we're going to make a folder called web app in that container, and we're going to open it. That's what working directory. It's going to make dir and it's going to cp. And then we're going to add, what's this? Flask app. So this is basically my folder in my project that contains the Flask app. And I'm going to put it in web app. Then we're going to run pip install -r requirements.txt. That just takes the requirements file that's in this folder that I copied to here. It's just going to install all the dependencies for this Flask project. And then entry point is basically like what is it when you launch this Docker container, what is it going to do? It's going to run Python, and what is it going to do with that is cmd. That's the command. So it's going to be python app.py. It's like this is written on one file in a terminal, Python app, one line rather in a terminal, python app.py. So all it does is just run that app using Python. So yeah, if I left this blank, I could type like Python whatever, and it would do that if it could find that file. But yeah, that's my Docker file. So basically when I'm in this Docker Compose and I do build dot, it builds an image based off of this Docker file, and that's what ends up running this container. So that's why there's no Nginx Alpine. There's none of that, because we were creating that image ourselves with that build dot command. And then I guess I'll just show you like what's in here. There's like an app. All this is doing, I mean, you can look through it on the GitHub with the link that I'm going to provide in the description later. All it's doing is like you go there, it increases hits, so there's one more hit every time you access it, and then it returns, you know, some text and how many times it's been viewed. So it's pretty straightforward. I mean, here's the line that connects it to the database. That's pretty much it. And the requirements.txt, remember we pip installed this. It's just Flask and Redis. That's it. Reverse, I mean, a static content, I guess I'll show there first because it's simple. It's literally just a line like, oh, this is some great content, so whatever. But let's look at this one. It's more interesting. So this is our Nginx configuration file. So Nginx, it's a web server. This is basically just saying we're going to listen to port 80. And if you remember, we mapped port 80 on this this reverse proxy Docker container, we map port 80 to port 80 of our local machine. So whenever you hit port 80, it's going to say, okay, have you hit /static? So if you do localhost /static, okay, well, we're going to send you to static content, and this is the name, the container name that you did in your Docker Compose. So it's gonna basically within all of these containers, it can like see that as a DNS name that you can access what's on it. So we're gonna access port 80 and go to index.html. And then basically you need this header to be able to get there. So copy and paste that. And the same thing with /app. It's going to be Flask app 5000. Like when you type in localhost /app, it's going to take you here. Or if you had a public IP, it would say, the IP /app. It takes you to this page, so which is the Flask app. So I guess with that, that's like everything. So let me just show you now how this works here. So this is a folder that just has that same project in it. Let me do it like that so you can see. What if I change something in the Flask app just so you can see, because I wanted to show you it building without it being cached. So if I go cd Flask app and, well, let me see what's here, and I do vi app.py. What? Okay, I don't know what I just did, but anyway, let's say I wanted to say something different here, like this is a truly fantastic web app. I'll save that. And okay, so now there should be something different, so it's going to have to build it. So Docker Compose build. See what happens. So some of it's cached, as you can see. Redis uses image skipping, like it knows what to do. But then because something changed in Flask app, it's going to have to rebuild our Docker image using the Docker file. It's not that important, but some stuff's happening here. So as you can see, we now are ready to do Docker Compose up. So everything's built now. We built our configuration. We're ready to go. Let's launch it. Okay, so let's go to the browser. We're going to type localhost/app. And here we are at our fantastic web app powered by Flask. It has been viewed 26 times. Could I keep reloading it? 27, 28, 29. All right, you get the idea. And then we'll do localhost/static. Incredible content. So it's taken us, basically using that Nginx reverse proxy, it takes us wherever we tell it to take us, like /static/app. It'll direct us to the right container. And let's go back to the terminal just so we can look at this. If I go to another tab here and type docker ps, that'll show me all the Docker containers that are running. So as you can see, there's 4 different Docker containers, and that's it. That's our 4 containers I showed you earlier in this wireframe. So that's how Docker Compose works, and I'm just going to hit Control-C and stop everything. And when I run this again, I guess it's still shutting everything down, but there's 2 of them. 2 of them shut down. Let's see when it's done. Okay, it's done now. So clear docker ps. Oh look, nothing's running because I shut it down. So that's basically how Docker Compose works. Obviously in enterprise, you're probably going to be doing that on a cloud with a public IP instead of just running it off of my MacBook that I can access from my MacBook on my local host. But it's just an example. I mean, obviously we're not going to be serving a website that's like, this is a great website, and that's it. So it just shows you how this works, and I'm going to link this in the YouTube so that you can just take a look at the code yourself and see what you think. Alright, that's my YouTube video. Bye-bye.